second session will provide three country perspectives from South Africa, Ghana, and Namibia, as well as engage with some of the financing aspects that are central for leveraging opportunities of clean energy systems as part of a broader continental industrialization agenda. So I'm going to jump right into briefly introducing our first three speakers, who will spend the next 15 minutes jointly sharing insights from South Africa. First, we have Gerard, who is the Chief Director at South Africa's Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, and he brings extensive experience in government working as the Green Industries Chief Director.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to the inputs from the other presenters and the questions we get today. So what I'll do is I'll just give you a high-level overview of the renewable energy process in South Africa, and I'll also focus a bit on the economic and industrial development part. Renewable energy program was started around 2010 in South Africa, and I think the main reason we started this was to get private sector investment in infrastructure development. It's very expensive in most countries in the world to roll out infrastructure, and government funding is limited. So this provided an ideal vehicle to increase the generation capacity on our grid. We had massive shortages already during the last decade on electricity, and as you can see on the slides, the program rolled out quite rapidly with over 112 of these renewable projects implemented or in the final stages of implementation. Now, the big problem initially was the cost of renewable energy, and you'll see on the middle slide, it was 3.12 Rand was the average cost, and we never really understood how we would get to the point where this would be affordable and how to fund it. But very much to our surprise, to a certain extent, these prices came down very, very rapidly. Now, this was obviously good news to everybody, but I can tell you it also creates a lot of tension in a country like South Africa. South Africa has got a long history of coal-based energy and coal mining. We export a lot of coal, but a lot of our coal-fired power stations are very old, so they basically have reached end of life. And you see on the graph on the left how these stations basically have to be decommissioned and replaced. Now, with the low cost of renewables, this is basically a big competitor in this energy generation market. So it's a very big threat for coal. We see on the right the global demand for coal is going down continuously, and the local demand for coal is going down. And we also now have the climate change commitment. So the coal industry is basically under threat. Now, the big opportunity with renewable energy is, of course, that you can put electricity on a grid quite rapidly. You can run a lot of these programs in parallel, but there's also a big opportunity to industrialize the components that you use in the renewable energy space, and also for socio-economic development. So you'll see, I showed in the previous slide the localization targets we had for the different bid rounds. And basically, the idea was that this must contribute to alleviating unemployment, alleviating inequality in the country, develop new skills, and so on. And we saw in a very short space of time, very significant investment in manufacturing, over 3 billion Rand. But the fact that we suspended the program meant that we lost a lot of this investment, and it created a massive loss in confidence in the system. So if we can go to the next slide. So I would say the main lessons we learned in this space is you need long-term transparency. You must also roll out the program at a pace that your country can can handle. If you want to have industrialization, you must do it at the pace that you can handle. Another risk we learned is don't change the rules all the time. You know, be transparent about that, and you know, get buy-in from all the main stakeholders in the process to quickly get all the main stakeholders to buy into a process. So we've started to use a master plan process to try and put this renewable industry and renewable energy industrialization back on track. And my colleague Mandisa will now explain. She's involved in managing and administrating the process. She will explain to you how we do it. Thank you.
SARM is the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. It is one of the 14 master plans that are being developed by relevant sectors. So SARM is again a collaborative effort with the relevant ministry being the Department of Mineral Resources taking on board the lead on the oversight committee responsibilities. What the ministry does with the SARM process is again create a platform where they engage with industry representatives and labor representatives, where all the SARM process and I guess plan elements are engaged with, deeply deliberated through the support of the task teams that are experts and potential implementers and champions of all that will come out of the master plans. And then with the Executive Oversight Committee, this is where all the levers that are put forward are kind of reviewed, and then the EOC and the ministry take on board, signing off on what is being submitted, or also sent back for further reiterations with the team. So quickly, just to clarify what SARM is. SARM is not a policy plan. It's not meant to replace the integrated resource plan. In fact, majority of the SARM work and the focus of the work is informed by the allocations as per the integrated resource plan. What it is, it's mainly an implementation plan that is really driving the industrialization of the renewable energy sector. And so, like any collaborative process, SARM also has a vision, objectives that continually just guide the SARM scope. So this is where where the process always refocuses and ensures that the SARM process stays on course to deliver an implementable plan. There are several platforms that the general public can get involved in. But essentially what makes up the team is the SARM team, where you have the project committee that meets fortnightly with the project managed team that works closely with the content development and coordinating across the EOC down to the industry reference group and the individuals that continually contribute to the SARM process. So over the course of the SARM work, a key enabling areas have been identified, these levers. And within each of these focus areas, there's a task team that's put together by either labor, industry, and government. And for this process then to be successful, it's been important that the task team members supporting this work could potentially be implementers or champions of all the emerging recommendations. For example, in the trade and export support to access regional opportunities, the focus there would involve local manufacturing facilities that can take advantage of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So that is exactly how it will then work. But these work streams are not also working independently. Some will have trade-offs, some will have overlapping levers that will all ultimately work together to at least see the SARM team producing and delivering an implementable plan. And again, because we aren't just looking at South Africa, what we also have looked at as the SARM team to kind of understand what other countries have done to boost their industrialization. You can see a list of countries. I won't get into much detail on what they've kind of used to boost renewable energy industrialization. Some, where they top up on a PPA, where there's localized certain components. Some subsidized loans, so financing is also a big part of alleviating the barriers and really boosting industrialization. And again, here, then you just drill down and bring it back home with South African markets, where then you look at their characteristics and also just how they've designed their own renewable energy auction programs, what the winner selection process looks like, what do the bidders need to be compliant for, but again, also ultimately what, local content requirements, to what extent is that always represented in some of the countries' auction programs. Gerald has spoken to the delays that the auction program suffered, and on the slide here, you'll see just a list of companies that either are still within the country with manufacturing capabilities. Some had to close down due to that uncertainty risk. So if you understand here that there was capability, and there's still at least hope that some of these activities will be reignited, and hopefully SARM will engage with those opportunities and identify more industrialization capabilities. And this is just essentially a slide that will speak to manufacturing value chains across all the three technologies, wind and solar and battery, and then what the components are categorized as. And this again is a manufacturing value chain, where we kind of look at where are the opportunities, what is possible for the country, and with obviously more volumes and demands, that ties in well with the industrialization plan, and where the value chains are opportunities and low-hanging fruits. So I will close there and pass it on to Gelo. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mandisa and Gerard. And really building on this particular slide from Mandisa, we thought it would be useful to just take a second, being cognizant of time, to highlight one specific opportunity. And we've done work on the lithium-ion battery value chain for South Africa and the opportunities associated to that. And we just wanted to highlight some of the key findings. There's a whole report that is available and you can look at. So I'll be very brief. But of course, the lithium-ion battery is a big opportunity. It's already growing quite fast, and we likely to see exponential growth going forward, driven particularly by the e-mobility market, but also by the renewable energy market overall. So really a big source of demand domestically on the continent, but also globally. And if we look at the lithium-ion battery value chain, you see that it's quite a varied value chain when it comes to a lot of raw materials, a lot of minerals, then a lot of processed minerals, primarily a cathode, an anode, an electrolyte, and a separator, which are just refined raw materials. And then a number of key components like battery management system, energy management system, that are then packaged through a casing into an actual battery and then, of course, used. So there's quite a lot of components or inputs into an actual lithium-ion batteries, and it must be acknowledged that there are many different chemistries. Actually, it's lithium-ion batteries, and many different chemistries are available and used for different purposes. Don't have time to get into the detail of that today, but it is quite important. Some are dominated by manganese, some by aluminium, some by titanium, some by nickel, and all of them have lithium, hence the name. If we look at South Africa, what we find is that we have quite strong research and development capabilities in lithium-ion batteries. We actually have capabilities in the entire value chain of lithium-ion batteries, from the development of precursors, which are refined minerals, all the way to cells and batteries, to the packing, to the testing, to the recycling. And we have those capabilities in the country, and that provides quite a richness of skills. We're not able to keep up in terms of patents necessarily, but certainly we have a lot of skills in the country. If we look at the minerals, what you find is that certainly in South Africa, we have a lot of the minerals that are necessary to build a lithium-ion battery. And if you look at Southern Africa, then we have all the minerals required to build a lithium-ion battery. So certainly from a regional perspective, the opportunity is here in terms of leveraging those minerals. Of course, the question is, can we leverage those minerals? And if we look at the beneficiation, from a South African perspective, you'll find that there's little beneficiation of minerals to battery grade. We do refine manganese and aluminium to battery grade, and we have nickel and lithium that are in the pipeline. But this is quite small, and there's nothing else really in the region. So yet to be harnessed. If you look at cell and battery manufacturing, what you find is that when it comes to the cell manufacturing, we do have the capabilities in the country, but there's currently no commercial production of battery cells. We only have a pilot plant, and it remains to be seen whether actually it could be competitive. It's one thing to know how to make it, it's another to be competitive and be able to compete with China. So, no plans have been put forward to show that actually manufacturing cells, which is the core of any battery, would be competitive in South Africa or in the region. If we look, however, at battery manufacturing, which is the assembly of the batteries based on imported cells, then we have a lot of firms actually available and active in this particular space in the country, and it's quite a vibrant industry. And some have even leveraged this to develop specific offerings and vehicles. So it's a very interesting space where the battery is made from locally designed and manufactured components, with the exception of the cell, which tends to be imported from China or some other East Asian country. And then we have some interesting capabilities around second life batteries, which is a growing space as well. Reusing batteries that have been used in electric vehicles for stationary purposes. And then battery recycling, like cell manufacturing, remains to be proven economically viable. We do have the industrial know-how to do it, but you need the scale to do that, and it's not clear yet. So really, that's my last 2 slides. There's some key policy implications when thinking about this, is that when we're talking about all our industrial opportunities, and such in the case for lithium-ion batteries, we need to understand what's the competitive advantage for the country or the region, and where can we have that competitive advantage in the value chain. It's sometimes not that obvious to find it, and it's not necessarily what we think it is in the first place. We obviously need the policy support, making sure that we actually send the right signal in the development of demand, but also in supplying the support for industrial development capacity. We need access to market. That's domestically, that's regionally, and that's globally. We need often probably a dual strategy around the local market and the global market. And then, of course, we need the skills and the R&D to keep up with global developments. We may not be a leader when it comes to R&D in many fields, but at least we need to be able to keep up in terms of providing skills. So conclusion, what you find is that certainly when it comes to lithium and battery value chain, it's a very vibrant value chain in South Africa and even in the region. We not necessarily have all the stages that are at the same stage of development, and we need to really understand where we can be competitive. Beyond mining, it's quite clear that battery manufacturing, that is not cell manufacturing, it's battery manufacturing, and mineral refining are ready for scale. Cell manufacturing and recycling could be explored, but they are yet to be proven economically sustainable. But what is sure is that developing lithium-ion battery value chain is critical if we are serious about developing local content in the country and in the region, both for renewable energy overall, and mobility as well. So thank you for your time. You can download the report as well. And we hope that between the 3 of us, we provided a compelling picture of the South African experience.
Thanks, Gaylor, and thank you all for your inputs. And our discussant will engage with some of the insights later in the session. So we'll shift our attention to finance and hear from the Industrial Development Corporation. We have David Sekgororwana, who serves as the Business Development Manager within the IDC's Energy Unit. And he has numerous years of working experience in R&D, petrochemical operations, strategy, and business funding. So the floor is yours, David.
Thank you very much, Maria. I will keep my presentation very brief on the basis that what Kuda, Jan, Gerard, Gaylor address some of the issues that I have captured in the presentation. The IDC is a South African-based DFI under the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. And when you look at the IDC, we've got various business units. However, our focus when we look at any of the investments, be it energy or anything, we look at the impact across the value chain. So as Gerard indicated in his presentation, our experiences given the RIP round 1 and round 2, where from a value chain perspective, in anticipation of the RIP program, we made investments in the manufacturing sector. DCD for towers, unfortunately, due to the non-execution of that integrated resource plan 2010, that caused a lot of uncertainty in the market to the extent that it affected the manufacturing capacity that we invested in, and most of them, unfortunately, they had to close down. But from the IDC perspective, given that we are a DFI, we are focusing on developmental outcomes, be it economic activity facilitating that, leading industrial capacity development. And in our unit, it's more so looking at the renewable energy solutions, particularly on the back of what Kuda said earlier on, the challenges that we've been facing in South Africa when it comes to energy security. On the basis that when you look at the existing coal power stations, most of them between now and 2030, partially or completely, some of them will come offline. So we need to replace that loss of capacity so that we don't continue having load shedding going forward. From an IDC energy unit perspective, we have made investments in solar, wind, CSP, and hydro. When you look at the breakdown in terms of, or the total that has been invested so far in South Africa, this is now, by the way, between round 1, bid window 1 and bid window 3, it's 120 billion. However, when you look at the breakdown, one may perceive that as the DFI, we're not playing a proeminent role. One would have expected that the IDC as a DFI would have had massive investment in excess, let's say, of 20 or whatever, 30%. However, what is key here is, as a DFI, we play a role in terms of addressing market failures. And once the market failures have been addressed, we leave it to the market in terms of driving that forward. Now, to give that into perspective, during the beginning of round 1 and round 2, as part of the RIP program, there was very little appetite from commercial banks getting involved, particularly on the basis that they did not necessarily understand the business model as well as the funding model. The IDC as well as the DBSA, we were critical in terms of playing that role in order to de-risk the business model, but more so to show that the funding model was viable in South Africa, as was proven elsewhere in the world. We have played that role in round 1 and round 2. What we have seen subsequent to that, round 3 and 3.5, and more so now with bid window 5, that closed on the bid submissions on the 16th of August. It's now we have the commercial banks coming on board with massive investments for bid window 5. And I assume that once we've seen or the preferred bidders have been announced, it will become very clear that on the basis of the role that the IDC and the DBSA played in terms of de-risking the sector, the commercial banks are now seeing value in terms of investing in the sector. Going forward, what does it mean? So it doesn't end with just round 1 and round 2. Globally, we do acknowledge that the just energy or clean energy drivers are still applicable, be it environmental policy and regulations, energy security, and more so changing consumer needs. The diagram on the right, on the top right, indicates as part of the IRP 2019, what we expect in that renewable energy will play a big role going forward from a energy mix point of view, but more so from adding additional capacity in terms of replacing potential losses of coal to power between now and 2030. The diagram below, and this is what Jan as well as Galo now touched on, is that the more you introduce the renewable energy such as PV and wind, they are not as highly dispatchable as coal or gas to power solutions. Therefore, to make them equivalent to these from a dispatchability point of view, you need energy storage to come in, battery energy storage solutions to be implemented. And most of what we're seeing is that it's a drive, it's a move away from a centralized energy systems or power systems to decentralized power systems. And this will require the use of energy storage in the systems going forward. Therefore, these are the new technologies that we see coming up, that as the IDC, we need to play a role in terms of de-risking so that it's easily acceptable by the other funders, particularly so the commercial banks. Not just from a South African perspective, we do take cognizance of the fact that we've got a role to play in the rest of the continent. Our focus at the moment, especially given the post-COVID impact, is that we have prioritized on SADC at the moment, but more so as when the conditions improve, we will continue looking at the rest of the continent. But at the moment, we're looking at from a developmental perspective, as well as from a growth perspective. SADC is prioritized outside of SADC. It's on a case-by-case basis, and there are other countries that we have prioritized. The sector, as Galo indicated so far, when looking at the value chain, and let's take energy storage as an example, we are lagging behind. There's still a heavy reliance when you look at the value chain.
Sorry,
so when you look at,
if you could
thank you very much, Dale. I think Dale wanted to take over the presentation. I would have appreciated that. From a value chain perspective, we do acknowledge that there's still a high reliance on commodity exports. And therefore, at some point, we need to play a role in terms of beneficiating of these minerals to the extent, as Galo indicated, that we are in a position of investing in our own batteries in Africa. An example is that we need to think beyond how we've been doing business in South Africa, but as well as in the region. An example will be on the battery energy storage solutions. If we are to target the lithium-ion technology batteries, we are sitting with cobalt in the DRC. We're sitting with lithium in Zimbabwe. We're sitting with nickel in South Africa. We cannot, on our own as the individual countries, play a role in terms of a complete role in developing the value chains. Therefore, it will require partnerships in the region, but more so to ensure that the rest of Africa benefits and we do not rely on commodity exports. The last point that I indicate, Gerard has indicated on that, in as much as we try to play a role as a DFI and investing in local manufacturing capacity, we need long-term offtake to justify the investment in local manufacturing capacity, so that we are not affected by the start and stop of the REAP program under the public sector. From a funding perspective, as part of the lessons learned, when you look at round 1, round 2, and so far where we are, as any other funder will look at risk, and risk is informed by various aspects, be it market risk, be it technology, is it fully developed technology, at what stage is it the technology within that life cycle, also impacted by the regulations, but more so when looking at all these risks. The most important thing is when making an investment, what are the key things that we're driving towards? In South Africa, as an example, from a government perspective, as IDC, we are part of the government. That's driving the value chain development, and therefore local contents becomes very key. The other point, which is very important, what we have seen in this sector, in as much as we've de-risked from round 1 up until where we are now, round 3, we have a role to play as a DFI to ensure that this sector is properly transformed. And therefore, we don't wait until, as was the case in the mining sector, where it's more like where it's fully developed, but on the verge of being decimated, that we think that we need to transform these industries. We've got a role now at these early stages to make sure that we transform the industry, but more so empower almost everyone in the country. And the last slide, just to touch on the lessons learned so far from a funding perspective. Key lessons learned, and some of them have been highlighted. Early involvement of the DFIs is very crucial in terms of de-risking the business model as well as the funding model. The use of blended finance for these projects. We've placed so far heavy reliance, as if you look at the public sector program REAP, on government guarantees. The point that Jan made when he made a presentation going forward is this is more likely to change going forward, not only for South Africa, but for the rest of the continent, given that the funding model and the business model have been proven. Therefore, it becomes a commercial risk rather than relying on government funding going forward. And it happens everywhere in the world. It's not unique to South Africa. The last point that Gerard also emphasized on is about the long-term planning and the sustainability and avoiding the start and stop. But we do acknowledge that we cannot just rely on the REAP program for value chain development. We need, as South Africa, to look beyond from a demand perspective. Demand just based in on the REAP, but now more so looking at the commercial and industrial application opportunities that may surface from there, but also beyond the borders of South Africa and SADC. The last aspect is regarding what I indicated, that as a DFI, we play a role in terms of de-risking. We've got now the advent of new energy, of energy storage coming into play. And more so, most of you would have heard in the last couple of months, there's more now talk about green hydrogen. It's imperative that we do not see these new solutions that are being punted in isolation, but we see them as part of the overall planning from an energy perspective. So these solutions, they need to form part of the master plan, overall energy planning, and therefore, again, it's early stages. We need intervention of the likes of the IDC to make sure that we take them from where they are, if it's concept or planning stages, to a position where we deem them as bankable. It's about early market deployment to demonstrate the viability of the technologies. It's about coming up with innovative business and funding models to make sure that we can sustain these technologies going forward, but more so the energy sector. And again, it's about not only relying on external expertise. What we want to encourage as the IDC, we've been very vocal about it, is that in most of the investments that we're making, we would like to see the local parties playing a prominent role from an operational perspective and not being silent investors or passive investors in these investments. Therefore, we do make it as a need, and in fact, it's not just a need, it's an imperative that local players are operationally involved. The second last bullet point on the regulatory framework, it's about certainty as well. We do acknowledge that energy storage and green hydrogen, these are new technologies, and therefore we will need a regulatory framework to be developed. But that cannot be developed in isolation. It needs to take cognizance of the development of these technologies at this point in time, but more so going forward. And the last point, to re-emphasize again, that we cannot afford to make the same mistakes that we did with round one and round two from a value chain perspective development. And this is about localization. We need to look beyond REAP as a generator of demand for renewable energy, but go beyond that. If it's in the commercial and industrial application, so be it, but more so beyond the borders of South Africa.
Thank you so much, David. And that was really useful to see the links between what your energy unit is doing in the space of renewables and the previous speakers' presentations as well. I believe Dr. Mutala Mohammed is back online. Again, he is from the Private Enterprise Federation in Ghana, and he'll share insights from the Ghanaian perspective. So over to you.
From the Ghana perspective, what I want to say is that when it comes to the renewable energy sector, Ghana hasn't done that. I mean, we haven't done that bad in terms of the renewable energy technology adoption in the country. So if you look at the Renewable Energy Act of 2011, which was actually passed by Parliament at 832, subsequently, government decided to put up the strategic energy, master plan, the renewable energy master plan, which actually highlights the target government set for itself. So in 2015, government decided that it was actually going for 10% of renewable energy penetration into the energy mix by 2020. Unfortunately, we couldn't actually hit that particular target. So government has to postpone that particular target to 2030. So now we are now going for 2030 as the target. And if you look at the last update from the Ministry of Energy shows that we are currently around 1.3. We are currently around 1.3% of renewable energy penetration in our energy mix. And majority of our energy, predominantly come from the thermal. Close to about 64% of our energy generation from Ghana comes from the thermal energy. Having said that, when it comes to the private sector, government has actually put up a number of initiatives to be able to attract industry to adopt the technology. So if you look at, for example, the GIPC law, that is the Ghana Investment Promotion Center law, which tends to actually put up the act is supposed to actually attract investors into the renewable energy sector. So they talk about tax holidays, incentives for renewable energy, equipment and all that are actually supposed to come into the country. So as part of the law, any equipment or any device that is supposed to actually get into the country is supposed to actually be a tax-free. Unfortunately, the practicality of the law has been the issue. People, you have investors that come into the country, they try to put up renewable energy technologies. Unfortunately, these things do not work in practicality when they go for some of these things. So that has been one of the challenges. Another issue that has actually come out recently with regards to the renewable energy sector, particularly for the private sector, has to do with the feed-in tariff system. So just 2020, Ghana decided to actually amend the Renewable Energy Act of 2011, which is now at 1045 of 2020. And as one of the amendment has to do with the feed-in tariff system, where government has decided to abandon the feed-in tariff system in the law in that particular act and now going for a competitive bidding process. So now it becomes very difficult where PURC, initially PURC, that is the Public Utility Regulatory Commission, used to set the tariff for some of these companies, for renewable energy system. Unfortunately, as it stands now, it's a competitive process where companies have to go in and bid. So that has been a big challenge. Another issue has to do with the net metering system, where government has decided not to actually go. There has been an issue with regards to its implementation. So government is actually looking at it and stuff. So in Ghana, I would say that we haven't done that much. We haven't done that bad. Government has put in, when it comes to regulatory issues and legislations and all that, government has done its best to actually put into incentivize investors and people who actually wanted to, adopt the technology. So if you look at the Renewable Energy Act, government actually decided to make it a mandatory purchase policy where the distribution companies, that is the ECG, Electricity Company of Ghana, was mandated to actually purchase a certain percentage of energy that is actually generated by renewable energy process. There is also a mandatory connection policy, and the Renewable Energy Fund. The fund was actually supposed to be created to be able to, do a lot of projects in the renewable energy sector. Unfortunately, this has actually not been realized yet. And the last time we had an update was that Parliament is looking at different ways to actually see where they can actually get that particular money coming in to be able to create that particular fund. As it stands now, government is sort of like, hands are really tied when it comes to taxes and stuff. It cannot actually burden the people with more taxes and all that. So government has decided to actually put that particular energy fund, renewable energy fund, on hold for now. But I will say that, the private sectors themselves, when it comes to adoption, you realize that most of these companies have realized that, energy tariff in Ghana is very high. We have one of the highest energy tariff across our sub-region. And it's kind of like a big burden for companies and industries, where energy actually forms a major cost component of their production processes. So most of these companies now are turning to renewable energy, where they themselves are looking for alternative sources of energy. And I would say that even if you look at our renewable energy penetration now, we stand at around 1.33%. Majority, close to about 98% of it, is coming from solar. So most of these companies are now looking for these alternatives, solar as a major alternative when it comes to their energy, energy usage. So you realize that they are now putting up solar system to be able to augment their energy needs when it comes to their production. So basically, that is what I have to say when it comes to the Ghana perspective on renewable energy and the private sector adoption of the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutala. We are very pleased to have Dr. Elvis Avnia, who is a senior researcher at the Center for Competition Regulation and Economic Development, affiliated with the University of Johannesburg. Prior to that, he was with the University of Oxford's Technology and Management Center for Development, and his research has covered issues of innovation, technical change, and industrial development. So thank you for your participation, Elvis. I'll hand over to you to provide your comments on our speakers' inputs thus far, and time permitting, we can maybe engage with some questions.
Thanks, Maria, for moderating this very interesting session, and thanks, Faisal, for organizing the entire event and your team. And thanks as well to the presenters for giving us quite very rich insight and interesting happenings around the continent, and how two important countries of the continent are driving towards their renewable energy agenda initiatives. And of course, we've had David, who gave us an aspect of the finance aspect, where in other words, he's trying to tell us to try to put our money where our mouth is. So listen to the three presentations. I picked up several common threads that I do think cut across the country cases. I'm picking up that almost all the countries are still heavily fossil reliant in their energy generation mix, and there's been quite some progress, but this progress towards the renewable energy agenda or mix is still very slow, and there is some level of consensus across the countries and across even the IDC that there are opportunities that exist in renewable energy space. And we've seen specifically an example Gela gave was on the lithium ion battery market, where he does emphasize that there are opportunities in this particular sector, and there are capabilities already available in South Africa. And of course, that also brings us to the role of other institutions in trying to sort of scale up some of these industries where we do have potentials and capabilities, and probably trying to expand some of these resources and know-how and capabilities to other parts of the continent. But of course, we do understand that there are always gaps in policy and finance, and there's always been sort of a high emphasis on the kind of environment, the constrained fiscal environment that most of the countries in the sub-region operate in. So we do see a strong recognition that there is a need for sort of greater collaboration between institutions within countries, but as well as countries across the sub-region. And these issues have come up quite strongly in some of the deliberations we are having in the session today. And an example David gave was around how the IDC was able to de-risk some of the risk around renewable energy in South Africa by its basic business models and finance strategies, and how we do see commercial banks coming in now. And I think that is a great experience on how some government agencies, particularly those with some financial capabilities, can try to sort of big push some of these new industries that would want to sort of have a say in going forward as a continent. And also we do, I think a great emphasis also is on the different collaborations that are needed on the continent, particularly in terms of policy development and policy implementation. And we do see the gaps that is in Ghana. We do see that there have been policy instruments that have been passed by Parliament at the high level of Parliament, but we do see at the implementation stages, we don't see this thing manifesting and firms and private businesses benefiting from some of these policies that are on paper. So we do need regional institutions like the AfCTFA Secretariat, which luckily is in Ghana, and as well as the other African institutions to try to sort of push some of these agendas. And some of this could come up in terms of regional policy frameworks, or it could be continental policy frameworks. And these institutions could also be very important in integrating particularly renewable energy agenda into the continental and regional development plans and strategies. And this is important, particularly now for the cross-border integration that we are pursuing as a continent, right? And these things also come up during the introduction remarks in the first session regarding standardization issues that we still have on the continent, high tariffs that we still have on the continent. And we do see quite strongly specific roles for the AfCTFA and the AU institutions on trying to open up markets for some of these technologies that we are talking about today, supporting individual countries, but as well as regional bodies with policy support that actually work, not just those on paper, but things that we can actually try and implement. And as well regarding skills and R&D and certainty, these are quite critical points that came out that I think are very important in these sort of discussions. But a key point that I think I generally missed, and that came up mainly when we're discussing the local content issues, it's mainly around what specific things some of our countries that we've looked at today and other countries are doing towards the development of these renewable energy technologies. Not necessarily just building the infrastructure and adopting some of these technologies, but how are we trying to localize and build these capabilities and technologies that we do know works in our context and we do know works for our purposes. And I think we have tried to take advantage to a large degree of our technological backwardness, but I do think particularly in this space we need to try to leapfrog and try to go to the frontier and try to develop some of these technologies and that may be useful for our particular purposes. And I think the local content discussions, the building of capabilities and the development of these specific technologies are very important if you actually want to sort of reap quite some competitive range from some of these technologies. So I think it's quite exciting to learn that some countries are leading are leading the narrative on the renewable energy agenda, and they are not seeing it just as an end, but also as a means for transformative industrialization on the continent. And I think these countries that I think we are discussing today, and I'm pretty much sure there are many more on the continent, could serve as centers of excellence for the continent's agenda on renewable energy going forward. I would like to end here. Thank you very much.
Can I pose a question to Gaylor, and it's linked to some of Elvis's inputs on developing continent-wide capabilities. I mean, South Africa has a lot to benefit from the capabilities it's developed from its mining and industrial activities, but do you have any insights on opportunities for regional cooperation in the lithium-ion batteries value chain? And David also referred to this in some way in his presentation, but given the reserves of critical minerals in countries outside of South Africa, what are the opportunities that you're seeing there?
Certainly, you know, as you alluded to, I mean, in the region, we find all the minerals, and that's really a starting point. You know, it's not in itself a competitive advantage, but it provides the basis for us to start looking at certainly at least mineral beneficiation in a regional way. And you know, it's really interesting that looking at SADC and even broader, we have all the minerals, and now we're talking about developing this at different levels. So the first one is mineral beneficiation, of course. This is largely done in South Africa, and there's even plans to beneficiate some of Zimbabwe's lithium into South Africa. But of course, from a regional perspective, we must be careful not to have a one-sided view, which is about, oh, well, we just let's see what we can do in South Africa and how we can slot in the other countries, you know, which is often the way regional division is thought from Pretoria. You know, we need to have a really different approach when you say what can be beneficial for all the countries. And here, I think, for me, what would be really interesting, you know, is first promoting regional demand and a regional integration around the demand. We had a very interesting presentation on the Southern African power pool, but it's still early stage in the power pool, and there's really little use of the market of the power pool. Actually, what you see is a lot of bilateral deals and very little regional trade in electricity. So how do we use that power pool to stimulate regional demand for renewable energy, but also for batteries? And then once we have that regional demand, then we can really kind of try and leverage local manufacturing. You know? And I think what we need to start exploring, it's a concept around how do we make regional content matter. You know, we have lots of thinking about local content and certainly in South Africa, but also in other countries. But how do we say, well, okay, maybe if I'm a South African government, you know, I'll give somewhat preference to South African local content. I don't think anyone would object to that, but we would also have strong regional content and preference to that. And I think, you know, we should start looking at those things for regional integration. I think that's a really great avenue in the value chain And we can look at that in the battery value chain when it comes to battery management system, the electronics, the casing, the aluminium. You know, we have aluminium in South Africa and in Mozambique. We have a lot of the minerals in other countries as well, and an expertise that is there in the whole region. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to be explored to really support regional integration in the value chain and using certainly batteries as one of the many avenues.
Thanks, Gaylor. My time is almost up. Thank you to all our speakers and our discussant for bringing it all together. There's always value in having a diverse and continent-wide dialogue, not only for the purpose of drawing lessons from country-level experiences, but also identifying how and where we can potentially cooperate around expanding our energy industries to drive industrialization, as well as addressing some of the institutional and regulatory issues.